Hey, what's up? Dave with Brazos Barbell. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than what I normally do on the channel. So instead of me talking about my training or some of the technique cues that we can use to improve our training, we are going to be talking about shoes. So specifically flat shoes in this case. That's what I use the most of. Unfortunately, I don't use heels a whole lot. I do use them for bench press, but we'll talk about even how that has factored into my flat shoe decisions. But we probably won't be making a heeled shoe video just because I don't have enough context there. But flat shoes for sure are something that almost everyone will encounter at some point, or you should encounter at some point, because if you're not deadlifting in flat shoes, you've already made a mistake right away. So we'll just assume that everyone is using flats. So I'm going to be talking about these four shoes. It's going to be the Barefoot shoes, the old Sabo deadlift shoes, the new Sabo deadlift pros, and the Reebok, I guess they were the original CrossFit TRs, or now they're just the Power Light mids is what I'm going to be talking about here. But I'll kind of work in some of the other shoe styles as well into this analysis and what you should be looking for when you're grading your own shoe. So I squat and deadlift in flat shoes. I'll use those as distinct variables when I'm talking about the shoes and how they could potentially, these shoes could factor in, and you could use different shoes for each of those lifts if that ends up being something that you'd want to do. So some of the main things that I'm looking for with a flat shoe is going to be the width of the toe box, the height of the sole itself, the stability of the shoe, lateral movement, or any sort of pushing into that toe box that I can get, just any of my movement within the shoe itself. So the biggest one for sure, if I'm starting with a flat shoe, especially when I'm grading with deadlift, is going to be the thickness of the sole. So I'm going to be talking about, I'll go shoe by shoe and use the same criteria for each of these and talk about what the shoe advertises that it's supposed to be doing, and then just my own personal experience. So one of the things that is going to be noteworthy with the way that I lift in both the squat and the deadlift is that I use a sumo stance, or in squatting, just a wide squat stance. So I think some of my experiences with some of these shoes may be different than the experiences that other people may have in the same shoe, but I'm going to factor that in and talk about how I think that the shoes could still fit for different people. So the first one I'll talk about is going to be the Barefoot. I think they call them the Barefoot athletic shoe. But this one I had high hopes for. Lots of people have been promoting this. You know, the Kabuki Strength Systems guys, Chris Duffin and Joe Sullivan, and those guys were promoting this one a lot. So I grabbed this shoe. And by the way, it's worth mentioning at this point that I paid for all of these shoes myself. This wasn't something that none of these were sent to me for free. There's no sort of sponsorship or anything. So everything that you hear from me is going to be totally objective. But the Barefoot athletic shoe, I think, does have a lot of things going for it. So first of all, if we look at the bottom of the shoe, this one is actually going to have the widest surface of the sole of the shoe, which I think is fantastic. And that's something that you'll hear me mention a bunch of times when talking about these other shoes as potential criticisms. So people, and you've probably seen other people that have worn these shoes talk about how they feel glued to the floor. This is with no reinforcement on the side of the shoe, where some of these other ones will do things like the metatarsal strap or even some of the edges coming out. This one just has a wide sole. That on its own creates a very, very good feeling of being glued onto the floor, because there isn't a feeling of needing to roll or the shoe feeling like it's going to roll, where some of these other ones have tried to create a little bit more creative solutions that are probably unnecessary. It also has an extremely wide toe box, which, if you've seen some of my videos on rooting or even the Kabuki videos on rooting, how important it is for me to be able to spread my toes on the floor and get good feedback from what my toes are doing. This shoe allows me to do that. Unfortunately, it had some major drawbacks as far as what I liked about the shoe, and things that ended up ultimately me having to ditch this shoe completely for both lifts. So the main problem that I had with this shoe was that without the high top, which I think they're actually making at this point, and I don't have that version, so maybe it'll solve all of this, but because this shoe has a low top, my heel was moving in this shoe dramatically. One of the main things one of the main issues that people have with something like deadlift slippers, and most people don't really like deadlift slippers if you have a wider stance or squatting in them, is just that your foot will move around. With these shoes, my heel was moving all over the place to a point that I really felt like I was slipping out of the ground when I got heavy or off of my original position. At lighter weights, I felt like I was glued to the floor. But all of a sudden, when the weight started affecting, I was creating more pressure with my foot, my heel was sliding all around, and I actually got starting to feel like I was very, very unstable rather than that original good feeling of stability. The other thing was, surprisingly, the thickness of the sole was actually more than any other one of these other shoes, which was very surprising to me. Some of these shoes will look like they have a thicker sole, but then they end up actually feeling very, very thin, and I'll elaborate on that some. But this shoe, even though the visible height of the sole is very small, actually just on my testing, me standing either barefoot with the shoe on or next to one of the other competitors, actually obviously had the thickest sole. So that was a problem for me. So even though it felt pretty good for deadlifting, I still couldn't wear it for deadlifting because it was obviously the thickest of these. Squatting, I had too many stability issues. I was moving around too much. So unfortunately, the barefoot shoe was just not one that would work for me. I do think that this could be a very, very good shoe for somebody who, if you're squatting, if your feet are more underneath you, then that would be okay. But again, you'll probably still run into the same issues, especially if you have any sort of movement of your foot rotationally on the floor. I think you'll still feel like your foot is moving around. So to me, this shoe is an upgrade over deadlift slippers, but still I don't put it on my high list of shoes that are very, very effective. The next shoe that I want to talk about is going to be the original Sabo deadlift shoes. I included these in the conversation because they probably are going to fit all of the same criteria as what just a standard wrestling shoe would be, which is going to end up being probably a very solid recommendation as shoes go. So first of all these shoes, take out the insole. If you're lifting with the insole in your shoe, you're making a mistake. I'm talking about the thickness of the sole and everything. Just remove the insole. So all these shoes come with insoles, but you should not be including that while you're lifting. So anyway, the Sabo deadlift shoe is essentially just a wrestling shoe with these two straps that we have on the shoe. So I don't know personally if these straps really matter, but they do add to a good feeling of security in the shoe. So some of the issues that I had with the Barefoot shoe are alleviated with this shoe because of the high top. Now my foot does not move around. Also, we can see just with the construction of this that the sole wraps around the heel, which I think also on its own would eliminate that heel moving anyway. The straps probably are unnecessary. When we get to the CrossFit shoe, these do not have any straps at all, and they end up feeling pretty stable. So if you're making your decision, whether you want to buy a wrestling shoe or this original Sabo deadlift shoe, I don't think that the strap on its own is going to be something that should factor in as far as creating stability, because I think the way that the sole is built is much more beneficial for keeping your foot in place and not having any of that movement, more so than the straps stabilizing your foot. But I think they can add a layer of stability, the feeling of stability, and make you just feel more stable when you're lifting. Now, some of the issues that I had with this one are that compared to the Barefoot shoe, we can see how much thinner the sole of the shoe, especially across the middle portion, is. This created issues for me when I was squatting. Deadlifting, I felt fine with this shoe. I want my feet to be a little bit more flexible with the placement. I kind of like being able to have some, quick adjustments that I can make with my feet. When I'm squatting, I feel much more that having a stable shoe, the boot kind of feeling makes much more of a difference. So the fact that it was thin did not really allow my foot to settle into the shoe like I wanted it to. It also has a much thinner toe box. So when my foot would settle, it would push into the edges of the shoe and kind of create a cramped feeling. And then again, I just didn't feel like I was creating the foundation that I wanted to in the shoe itself. So this one had a very, very thin sole. You can see in the middle portion here, the entire thickness of the sole is just as thick as this little piece of rubber down on the bottom. So essentially you're barefoot. So with these shoes, I think, or really any wrestling shoe that you can tell has a very thin sole, I think work very, very well for deadlifts. I don't think that needs to be really overthought. Sumo or conventional, I think a wrestling shoe or the original Sabo deadlift shoes are something that would work well for most people. Squatting, probably the same thing. I probably create more lateral force when I'm squatting than the average person does. And that feeling of the cramped toe box probably is not something that most people would encounter. But if you find other options where you do have a more open toe, I think that would probably be beneficial. But regardless, a wrestling shoe, the original Sabo deadlift shoe, I think is something that most people would very, very much enjoy. So the newest one, and actually pretty much the whole reason why I was making this video, is the Sabo Deadlift Pros. So these are the newest, intended upgrade from the original Sabos. And they come with some pretty major design changes that I was very skeptical of at first. And then after reading some reviews and talking to some people who are currently wearing these, I decided to order them myself. And my initial reaction was very positive. So a few things that are noteworthy here is that the way the shoe is designed is that this portion of the sole spreads out a little bit. So it's all of the things that I've mentioned. My main problem that I had with the Barefoot shoes is 100% eliminated by the heel of this shoe, and I'll say heel in quotes, just the heel area of the shoe, having some spread and reinforcing that area to prevent any rolling. They do the same thing with the front portion around the toe. So again, that feeling of stability. Again, the straps on the shoe probably are unnecessary. I found that I felt pretty much exactly the same. When I had them loose and when I had them tight, the stability of the shoe felt pretty much the same to me. The issues with this shoe that eventually made it impossible to overcome are that this heel actually is a heel. They advertise and they say that it's not. On their website, they talk about how it's carved into the shoe, but they even acknowledge that there is a small drop associated with having the heel of this shoe. It's not as large as what visually it looks like. At first, I really had difficulty noticing it. When I put it on, the shoe feels flat. For sure around where the toe is and in the mid portion of the shoe, those areas are flat. But there is a small heel on this shoe. So wearing them on their own, I couldn't really tell. Putting them next to the other shoes, I could tell a little bit. But after training in them for a couple of sessions and then switching back to the shoes that I know are totally flat, it was a very, very noticeable and very problematic difference, especially for deadlifting. So when I deadlifted in these shoes, at lighter weights, I really didn't have any issues. When things got heavy, I got kicked onto my toes big time. Now, my deadlift hasn't been all that great recently, but in the last few weeks, it's been very, very good. And I had kind of an unexpectedly problematic session with the new shoes, and then going back to the old shoes, it went back to being exceptionally good again. So after feeling the heel and then becoming aware of them and then seeing the issues getting kicked forward, kind of being unable to open up into the deadlift and keep my balance where I wanted it, the problems with these shoes I think are very, very real. Now, if you want to squat in these shoes, I think these are a fantastic shoe. All of the feelings of stability are there. The shoe has the very wide foundation. That small heel is very, very hard to notice. When you're squatting, it probably doesn't matter, and some people will probably really like it. For deadlifting, I cannot recommend these shoes. There's no reason in my mind that you would want a shoe that has any obvious elevation anywhere, and especially in the heel, I just can't understand why you would make a shoe specifically for deadlift that goes against the things that we know that will help deadlift. So I do still really like the construction of these shoes and will be wearing these shoes for bench press. I've switched to a heeled shoe when I bench press because I've had difficulties with some of these other shoes with how they're shaped with the rounded edges when I'm bench pressing that the sides of my shoes look like they're up. Even this shoe, the rubber has a tendency to kind of curl at times. And so the judges don't like what that looks like with the shoe. This shoe has a very hard edge, and I think will also make for an excellent bench press shoe. So this shoe I think is fantastic if you want to squat or bench press in it. For deadlifts, I cannot recommend it, and it needs a major change if it's actually going to be a successful shoe. So the final one that we'll talk about, and unfortunately is probably going to be the winner, is now it's called the Reebok Power Light Mids. Originally it was the CrossFit Reebok Power Trainers or something like that. But anyway, this shoe is my favorite because it accomplishes everything that I've complained about in the other ones. But Reebok does not make this shoe consistently. Even the colorway that I had was a very, very small batch with the silverish on the sides with the black sole. They eventually changed it to having a gum sole, which they discontinued apparently, and now have a blue version of this with, last time I checked, they have only a size 9 available. So this shoe, I hesitated even, making this video for this reason, is it's just not available. Now, this shoe is the best. So all of the things that I mentioned about mattering, this shoe accomplishes. So it's very, very wide through the entire sole. The base of the sole it's not as thick as what it appears, but what wrapping around, this whole version is not thickness of the sole. The sole itself is just a thin piece of rubber, but these edges are the rubber wrapping around. So all of the issues that I've had with my heel moving on some of the other shoes, I feel none of that with these. The construction on the sides of the shoe is also very stable. There's no give, there's no stretch. So it has a wide toe box as well, to where no matter how my foot is sitting, I have room to spread my feet out. If you can get your hands on the Reebok Power shoes, this will be the best shoe that you will ever use for pretty much any circumstances. Bench press, you may have some issues. It does curl up a little bit. But that can be accomplished by changing. You can wear one of the other shoes, but it shouldn't make that big of a difference. So the big things that matter when you're choosing your shoe are that you can create the feeling of stability, you can get that good feedback, that your foot will be stable, that you won't have that lateral roll, and then that you can actually root your feet into the floor. So unfortunately, the Barefoot shoe, I think it has too many problems with it, that it's too thick. Surprisingly, you still move around too much in the heel. That creates issues. Any sort of wrestling shoe is going to be very good for the deadlifting. You have some flexibility as far as where you want your feet, but most of them are probably too thin for squatting. If you want a good squat shoe, a good flat squat shoe, the Sabo Deadlift Pros are probably a very, very good option, but you need a different deadlift shoe. If you can get your hands on the Reebok Power shoe, then pay whatever you need to get it. Even a used version, I think, will end up being the best shoe that you can find. And then you'll end up, a little bit more successful in your training because you'll actually have good stability, very, very thin sole, and that one is also a very well constructed shoe. So anyway, if you have any questions, if maybe I missed a shoe, maybe shoot me a message or leave me a comment, and hopefully that was helpful, and we'll see you next time.